I moved into Marowak on a gray-skied Tuesday, the kind of day where the clouds seemed to press down against the earth like a heavy lid. Everything about the place felt off from the moment I crossed the crooked town line sign that read, "Welcome to Marowak, home to quiet nights." That tagline didn't sit right with me, and it wouldn't be the last thing that gave me chills. I'd left the city behind for peace. My job as a freelance copywriter allowed me to work from anywhere. And after a few mental breakdowns, a messy breakup, and a therapist who nodded more than she spoke, I thought solitude might be the cure. The listing for a 2-story Victorian rental in Marowak showed up on my feed out of nowhere, fully furnished, cheap, and boasting a rich local culture. It was almost too good to be true. The house sat at the edge of town, nestled between clusters of skeletal birch trees. Its dark green paint peeled in long strips, like dead skin flaking off a reptile, and the windows were oddly narrow, like the place had been built to keep something out, or maybe in. Still, there was a kind of charm to its eerie stillness, a strange magnetism that pulled me in. I signed the papers without even meeting the landlord. Everything was handled through email. A single key arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. When I stepped inside, the smell of old cedar and faint dust tickled my nose. The air was heavier than I expected, and the house creaked with the slightest shift in weight. The furniture looked antique, real oak, not the prefab stuff from IKEA. An old grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner, frozen at 2:59 a.m. I found that deeply unsettling. There was a note waiting for me on the kitchen table, written in neat, slanted cursive on yellowing paper. It read, "Welcome to Marowak. You'll find the town peaceful and safe as long as you follow the rule. Do not, under any circumstances, look out any window after 3 a.m. The Marowak Preservation Committee." At first, I laughed. It had to be a prank, some small-town superstition meant to scare city folks. But something about the note's seriousness made me fold it carefully and tuck it in the drawer. As I unpacked and settled in, I kept glancing at the windows, tall, narrow things with thick curtains drawn shut. That night, I met my first neighbor. Her name was Mrs. Ellis, a petite woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She brought over a basket of muffins and introduced herself with a warmth that felt forced. Her eyes darted off into the sky, which had darkened considerably. "You'll like it here," she said, handing me the basket. "Just remember the rule." "You mean the window thing?" I tried to joke, but her face lost all softness. "Don't. Look out," she said, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "No matter what you hear." That night I lay awake in bed, my laptop glowing softly beside me. The wind whispered outside, occasionally brushing branches against the walls with scraping, skeletal fingers. I glanced at the time, 2:47 a.m. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen mid-sentence. Tick, tick, tick. The sound wasn't coming from my clock. It was the grandfather clock downstairs. I hadn't wound it. I was sure it had been dead when I arrived. Slowly, mechanically, it was ticking toward 3 a.m. I felt a cold sweat on my back. I got up, creeping down the old stairs, each one groaning under my weight. The ticking grew louder, sharper, like nails tapping glass. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, staring at the clock as it ticked to 3 hours, and then it stopped. Dead silence filled the house, the kind that feels oppressive, not peaceful. I turned back toward the hallway and froze. Something moved beyond the living room window. Just a flicker, a flash of movement, too fast to identify. I took an involuntary step forward, then remembered the note, Mrs. Ellis, her tight voice, "No matter what you hear." I heard it then. A soft knock. At the window, just once, light, deliberate. I backed away. Something told me not to speak, not to breathe too loudly. I crept upstairs, shut the door to my room, and buried myself under the blankets like a child. In the morning, everything was normal. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, the birds chirped, and I could almost believe it had been a dream. But the grandfather clock still read 3 a.m. I decided to explore the town the next day, partly to shake off the night and partly to see if everyone was as unnerving as Mrs. Ellis. Marowak was a small place, only a few hundred residents at best. The streets were lined with brick buildings, many of which were boarded up or had dust-caked windows. A cafe, a barber, a grocer that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Everyone I passed gave polite nods but didn't stop to chat. Their smiles vanished the moment they thought I wasn't looking. I stopped by the library, a Gothic structure with spires that looked like claws against the sky. Inside, I met a woman named Clara, the librarian, who had a wary kindness to her. I asked about the rule. She flinched slightly but didn't pretend not to know. "It's not a joke," she said, voice low. "Some people break it. They don't stay long after." "What happens to them?" She looked past me as if remembering something distant and cold. "They change or disappear." I asked more questions, but she shook her head. "Don't go. Digging, especially after dark. Marowak has always been like this. You learn to live with it." I left with more questions than answers, and a creeping sense that whatever haunted this town wasn't folklore. It was real. I couldn't deny what I'd felt that night. The presence. The knocking. Something had been on the other side of that glass. Back at the house, I pulled the curtains tighter. That night, I set up a camera near the window, hidden behind the books on a shelf. I wanted to know if something really came to the windows at 3 a.m. I told myself I wouldn't watch it live. I'd review the footage in the morning, but when the clock ticked past 2:50 a.m., my curiosity gnawed at me like a starving animal. I sat in front of the monitor, headphones on, heart racing. 59 a.m. The camera showed the narrow view of the living room window. Tick. At first, nothing. Then, movement, a silhouette. Tall, inhumanly thin. It moved with a twitching, almost glitching rhythm, like its joints didn't bend the right way. It pressed something against the glass. A hand. No, too many fingers. The audio picked up something faint. Whispering. Not in English, or any language I recognized. It wasn't even speech. It was sound bent into suggestion. It filled my ears like oil seeping into a crack. I tore the headphones off. The figure was still there, motionless now, facing the window, waiting. Then it turned, and I swear it looked directly into the lens. The screen went black. I jumped back, breath caught in my throat. My laptop was fried, frozen on a dead screen. I reached for the power button, but it wouldn't restart. That morning, when I went to retrieve the camera, it was gone. Only the books remained, neatly lined as if they'd never been touched. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That a shadow with too many fingers had whispered madness into my ears? Still, I kept hearing the sound in my head for days. A low murmur beneath every quiet moment. I began sleeping with earplugs, but the knocking always found me. I began to keep a journal, not because I wanted to document anything for others, God knows no one would believe me, but because I needed to sort out what was real and what was the product of sleepless nights and creeping paranoia. Each entry became a confessional of the things I heard and refused to see. March 5th, 2:58 a.m. Heard a scratching at the back door. Not a knock. Scratch, like nails dragging across the wood. Didn't open it. Didn't look. March 6th, 3:03 a.m. The hallway light flickered by itself. I unplugged the fixture. Still flickered. Heard faint footsteps overhead. I live alone. March 7th, 2:57 a.m. Got brave. Tried recording audio from all 3 rooms with windows. Captured nothing but static. Except at 3 a.m. sharp, there was 1 second of silence. Total, absolute silence. Then a voice whispered, "Almost." Almost what? I spent more time in the library. Clara grew colder the more questions I asked, warning me not to become curious. That's the word she used, as if curiosity was a disease. She mentioned others who had come before me, people who couldn't leave well enough alone. Every so often, she said quietly one afternoon, as I flipped through a dusty town registry, someone like you comes here. People who want to write, who want to find inspiration in old towns. They think they're just renting a house, but the house rents them too. What does that mean? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she gave me a stack of old microfilm records from the 1960s. Marowak used to be twice as large, with neighborhoods that no longer appeared on any map. Fires, disappearances, sudden migrations. It was like people had simply vanished from the official record, and always, tucked into the footnotes or whispered in newspaper columns, reports of strange figures outside homes. Always at 3 a.m. A woman named Helen Dorsey in 1963 said she saw her deceased husband standing at her bedroom window at 3:01. She opened the curtain. They found her 3 days later in the woods, alive, but unable to speak. She died 6 weeks later from what the coroner described as advanced psychological collapse. I memorized every word of that report. Back at the house, the knocking became more persistent. Some nights it was at the back door, other nights at the attic window I hadn't even noticed before. I nailed the attic shut. Then came the third week. The whispers started inside the house. It was subtle at first, like someone talking in the room next door. But every time I checked, no one was there. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the house settling. It was speech. Intentional. Urgent. One night I was brushing my teeth when I heard a voice right behind me say, "Don't look yet." I spun around, foam still in my mouth, but the bathroom was empty. I checked every window, every door. Nothing. Until I went back to the mirror. Written in fog, even though the room was cold and dry, were the words, "Don't look out." That was when I stopped brushing my teeth at night. I grew more reclusive, only going out for supplies in the daytime. I avoided Mrs. Ellis, who watched me from her porch like she was waiting for something. I stopped going to the library, too. Every time I walked into town, I could feel eyes on me. But no one spoke to me. No one warned me anymore. It was like they were waiting for me to break the rule, and I almost did. It was March 14th. I'd been up late editing a manuscript for a client, trying to drown out the knocking that had now become part of my nightly routine. I wore noise-canceling headphones and tried to convince myself that the rule was nothing more than collective hysteria. But then my phone buzzed. No number. Just a message. "Look." Then another. "We miss you." And another. "You'll see. Them." Just one glance. I shut the phone off, threw it across the room, but the messages kept appearing. On the mirror, on the walls, in the steam of my morning coffee, even in the text of the documents I was editing. Look, look, look. I stood by the window at 2:59 a.m. My hands trembled. My heart was an earthquake in my chest. The curtain was so thin, and the knocking was frantic now, urgent, like whatever was outside was scared or desperate. "Please," I heard a voice whisper, my mother's voice. She'd been dead for 5 years. Just one glance. "I miss you." My knees buckled. I didn't look, but I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to. I crawled away from the window and lay on the floor until sunrise. The next day, I tried to leave Marowak. My car wouldn't start. Battery dead. I got a ride into town from a man named Roland who ran the mechanic shop. He was one of the only people in town who didn't avoid me. He fixed the battery, but he said something strange as I prepared to leave. "You've seen too much," he said quietly. "They won't let you go. Not unless you give them something back." "What do they want?" I asked. He only shook his head. I drove straight to the town line, but the road didn't lead out anymore. I drove for 30 minutes in a straight line, watching the trees blur past, and then I saw the crooked sign again. Welcome to Marowak, home to quiet nights. I'd never turned around. I was sure of it, but somehow I was back. That night, I didn't sleep. The knocking didn't come. Instead, something worse did. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the lights in the house flickered and died. My phone buzzed once, just long enough for me to see a photo appear on the lock screen. It was me, sleeping, but taken from outside the window. I didn't go near the glass. I couldn't. I sat in the hallway, clutching a kitchen knife, even though I knew it would be useless. At 3:10 a.m., the power returned. The phone shut off. I threw it away. The grandfather clock still read 3. The next morning, I opened the front door to find a small package wrapped in burlap. No address, no tag. Inside was a single photograph, a group of people standing in front of my house. Maybe 20 of them, all in black, all with their faces scratched out. The date on the photo, March 14th, 1925, exactly 100 years ago, to the day. And in the background, in the upstairs window, there I was, staring out, mouth open, screaming. The photograph haunted me all day. I couldn't stop staring at it. Not just because of what was in it, but because of what wasn't. There was no sky in the image. None. Just darkness above the heads of those faceless people. No clouds, no stars, not even static grain. Just blackness, like the void itself, had swallowed the heavens that night. I took the photo into town, hoping someone could explain it or deny it. At the post office, the clerk took one glance and turned away without a word. At the diner, the cook pretended not to see me holding it. Finally, I brought it back to Clara at the library. Her hands trembled when she saw it. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It was left at my door." She stared at me a long time. "That house you're in, it's not just old, it's marked. It's been standing for over a century, and every 33 years, someone new moves in. Always someone alone. Always someone who doesn't know the rule until it's too late." "What happens after?" She shook her head slowly. "They become part of it. I didn't know what it meant, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. When I got home that evening, I noticed something strange. The curtains were open, all of them, every single one. I hadn't opened them. I knew that. I never opened them. I closed them in a panic, nailing some of them shut just to be safe. Then I walked the house, checking every corner, every closet, every drawer. Nothing out of place, except the air itself. It felt colder, more watched. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway again, holding the photo in one hand, a flashlight in the other. The clock downstairs ticked. AM. The temperature dropped. 10:59. AM. My breath fogged in front of me. And then 3 hours. AM. Silence. Not even the wind. Then tap, tap. This time not on the window, on the mirror. I turned slowly. The hallway mirror was fogged again, though the air was freezing. A message appeared before my eyes as if invisible fingers were dragging through the condensation. "You looked. Soon you'll see." I dropped the flashlight, and in the dark, I finally understood what Clara meant. It's not about breaking the rule, it's about wanting to. The moment you consider looking, that's when they begin watching you back. And once they know you're curious, there's no going back. Morning came like a lie. Sunlight spilled through the curtains I'd nailed shut the night before, warm and golden and impossibly normal. I checked every window. They were all wide open again. No nails, no damage, just sunlight and silence. I should have left right then. I should have run until my legs gave out, screamed until someone in the next town listened. But I didn't. Partly because I wasn't sure I could leave, and partly because something deeper was beginning to settle in me. Not fear, not yet. Something worse. curiosity. I spent the day calling old friends just to hear familiar voices. None picked up. A few numbers were suddenly disconnected. My email wouldn't send. My messages stayed stuck in the outbox. It was like the house, and maybe the town itself, was slowly cutting me off from the outside world. That night, I didn't wait until 3 a.m. I set up 3 audio recorders in different corners of the house. One by the living room window, one upstairs, near the attic, and one directly in front of the hallway mirror. I wanted proof, even if I died trying to get it. And then I waited. The knocking came earlier this time. 2:41 a.m., 3 sharp raps on the front door. Not the window, not the attic. The front door, like someone politely asking to come in. I sat perfectly still. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to scream, to throw open the curtains and confront whatever stood beyond them, but I didn't move. Another knock, slower this time, louder. Then a voice, male, calm. "Can we come in?" Just that. "Can we come in?" I crawled to the door, careful not to make noise. I pressed my ear against the wood. No footsteps, no rustling, just breath, slow and steady, like something inhuman practicing human behavior. Then another voice. This time, a child's. "We're cold out here. You left the windows open for us." I froze. They were right. I hadn't nailed the second floor ones again. The silence after that was worse than the knocking. I waited for glass to shatter, for footsteps overhead, for the thin gasp of a whisper in the walls. Nothing, just the quiet hum of the house, as if it were holding its breath with me. At 3:01 a.m., the hallway mirror cracked, a single hairline fracture, spreading slowly across the surface like a spider's web. No sound, just the sight of it. That was when I understood the real rule. It's not, don't look out the windows after 3 a.m. It's don't be seen looking out. Because if they know you see them, then they know where you are. I didn't sleep. When dawn finally crept in, I was still sitting at the base of the mirror, staring at the thin fracture like it might bloom into something worse. The hallway was cold, too cold for spring, and despite the sunshine bleeding in from the windows, the house still felt steeped in a kind of static, like a thunderstorm was waiting to unfold just behind the wallpaper. I checked the audio recorders. 2 had dead batteries, fresh ones, drained completely. Only the one by the mirror had captured anything. When I played it back, most of it was silence. Then, at 3:01 a.m., there was the crack of glass, followed by a whisper, barely audible through the static. "You saw us." No breath, no other noise. Just that, it wasn't my voice. I didn't go back to the library. Clara had warned me enough. And frankly, I didn't think she'd welcome me after I'd kept pushing. Instead, I wandered. Around the edges of Marrowick were overgrown paths that didn't show up on the local maps. Dirt trails that curved behind properties wrapped around. Streams and vanished between old pines. I took one of them, hoping to clear my head. But nothing in Marrowick is ever simple. About a half-mile out, I found a fence. Old iron, rusted in places, twisted in others. Behind it, tucked between tall trees, was what looked like an abandoned chapel, its steeple leaning like a drunk, windows boarded, roof rotted through in places. But someone had been there recently. There were candles, hundreds of them, arranged, in a wide circle outside the entrance. All were melted low, wax pooled on the dirt, and in the center of the circle was a chair, just a chair, facing the chapel. Empty. I stepped closer. As I did, I noticed something scratched into the wood of the chair's backrest. I looked. That was enough. I turned and left, half walking, half running back to town. By the time I reached my house, the sun was low. The windows were open again. This time, even the basement one. I didn't open it. I didn't have a basement, but the house did now. It had a door in the floor of the pantry, one I'd never seen before, one that creaked open on its own when I entered the kitchen. Wooden stairs led down into darkness. At the top of the steps sat another object, a Polaroid camera, fresh, film, still warm somehow. A note beside it read, "Prove what you see." I backed away, closed the pantry door, locked it, pushed the fridge in front of it. That night, I didn't sit in the hallway. I left the house entirely. I drove to the mechanic's shop, Roland, the only man in town who didn't look at me like I was already a ghost. I asked to sleep in the back. I didn't explain why. He didn't ask. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the knock, not on the door, on the wall, inside the shop, inside the place I'd run to for safety. Followed. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And at 3:00 a.m. exactly, the knocking stopped. Instead, from somewhere behind the drywall, I heard the sound of the camera. Click, whir, click, and then a whisper. "You brought us with you." In the morning, Roland was gone. His truck was still out front, shop wide open, coffee half finished on the counter. But no trace of him anywhere, except a photo left on the workbench. It was me, in the hallway, sitting in front of the cracked mirror, smiling. But I don't remember smiling. I don't remember anyone taking it. And behind me, in the reflection, were figures, tall, pale, featureless, watching. I didn't go home that morning. I sat in my car for hours with the engine running, parked outside the town's faded cemetery. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I blinked, I saw the photo again, me smiling in front of the mirror, though I hadn't smiled. And behind me, those things. I couldn't even describe them. They weren't ghosts. Ghosts were tragic, mournful, lost. These were something else. Curious, observant, as if they had been waiting behind a glass wall for someone stupid enough to lean too close. The photo wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the back of it. Written in neat, looping handwriting I didn't recognize were the words, "One more step and you're ours." I drove back to the library. Clara was gone. The doors were locked, the lights off. The open sign had been flipped over and covered with paper from the inside. I knocked and waited, but no answer came. I even called the number on the door. Disconnected. I circled around the back and found the emergency exit slightly ajar. Against every instinct I had left, I stepped inside. It was quiet, dusty. Every window was blacked out with paper or curtains. The library had always smelled like old books and lemon polish, but now it carried something different. Damp wood, mold, earth, the kind of smell you expect in an open grave. I walked slowly between the shelves until I reached Clara's desk. Her thermos was still there, still warm. A pair of reading glasses sat next to it, one arm broken and bent. There was no sign of a struggle, only a note taped to the inside of her desk drawer, hastily scrawled, "They're not dead. They're before. That's why we don't look, because they remember being seen." I didn't understand it then, but I knew I needed to get out of there. On my way out, I passed a cart of books half sorted. At the very top was a thin black leather-bound volume titled The First Glance, no author, no date. I opened it. It was full of names, pages and pages of them, hundreds, maybe thousands. Each name had two dates, a move-in date and a second one labeled Only Seen. My name was at the very bottom of the last page. Next to it, March 14, Seen. That was the day I almost looked out the window, the day I wanted to. The book slipped from my hands. When it hit the floor, every single window in the library shattered inward, spraying glass like a silent explosion. But no sound came with it. Not even the shattering, just the glass, the silence, and the feeling that something had just entered. Ran. When I got back to my house, the fridge I had pushed in front of the pantry door was gone. Not moved, gone. There was only the open door to the basement, yawning like a mouth. The old wooden steps descended into pitch-black nothing, and sitting at the top was the Polaroid camera. Still waiting. I should have burned the house to the ground. I should have left the town on foot, hitchhiked, crawled if I had to. But the pull of that camera, the suggestion that I could prove something, it overpowered every rational instinct. So I picked it up. I took a photo down the stairs. The film clicked, buzzed, and slowly pushed out a black square. I waited, and when the image developed, it wasn't black. It showed the basement, and in it, a mirror, tall, ornate, covered in a white sheet, except for the center where a hand had pulled the cloth back just enough to reveal an eye, staring directly into the camera. I dropped the photo. It fluttered down the stairs, vanishing into the dark. I didn't chase it. That night I stayed awake, every light on, every curtain nailed shut again, this time double-nailed, reinforced with wood and duct tape, and still. At 3 a.m., the basement door opened itself, slow, deliberate, creaking like it hadn't moved in years, even though I had just opened it, hours before. No footsteps came up, but something did.